Up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Friday Night Chill with Will. This is episode 18. I hope you guys are all doing well tonight. I'm doing just fine. I had a bit of a week off last week. I've been brainstorming some podcast topics to talk about. And yeah, so we took a week off, so it is what it is. But we're back, and tonight we're talking about a work-life balance. And I'm going to, of course, share my personal experience with that and just kind of how I'm navigating that currently compared to like how I've navigated it in the past. Because I would say it has changed quite significantly throughout the years, and I think it's definitely gotten better throughout the years. And I think so. Like my experience with a work-life balance has been like it was kind of rocky when I first entered the workforce. So like I started working a job. Oh, It Takes Two to Toku is here. Hi. Hello. Um, so I started working when I was 19, 18. I think 18 or 19 years old, something like that. I started working at a laser tag store. That was my first job. And I have pretty much consistently worked since then. There's only been like probably like at most a 3 month gap in the time that I like haven't been working at a regular day-to-day job. I was doing something like Uber or some kind of like gig work at the time. But for the most part, ever since then, I've been working. And as I've, progressed in my, I guess we'll call it a career, it's very generous to call any of it that. But as I've progressed, my relationship with work has definitely changed. I think I used to really prioritize doing a good job above like everything, and that's good. Like that's definitely good to want to do good at your job, but I think a lot of times it was a detriment, at least early on, because it caused me to be kind of less empathetic in certain situations, and especially when I was in like positions of authority. I I don't know. I feel like when I look back on certain situations, I feel like maybe I could have chilled out a little bit, and it probably wasn't that serious. And if I were to do that same thing now, I don't think I would have taken the situation as seriously. And I think that's mostly because I set this expectation up for myself when I like started working, that I just always wanted to do a good job and just please my employer, so that way they keep you around, and that they tell you you do a good job and all that stuff, because it's nice to hear that you're doing a good job. And I think what I didn't realize is getting those compliments and that praise was not really something I had to work that hard for. Um, and that could be because maybe like people's expectations have changed, especially within the last couple years. I mean, I don't know the specific reasoning behind it, but I don't know. The common theme that I notice is I was always doing a good job I just felt like I would never was doing a good job, which didn't really make any sense. And I think part of it was, if I were to get like any kind of criticism about anything that I was doing at work, I would just assume that I was just doing really badly, and that really wasn't the case. I was ignoring all of my strengths and all of the things that I brought to, my employer, and I would just throw all those things out just because they had like a thing, a little note on me, and so I think that really negatively affected, my relationship with work. And it would just have me take things too seriously. And there was a period of time where like there would be friends I worked with, and things would get really heated because I would I would hold on to things that were going on at work, and I would bring it up in like our personal lives, and that didn't really make a whole lot of sense because outside of work, none of this stuff really mattered, and I mean that's kind of like the ultimate realization that I come to, all these years later, is that a lot of the stuff that, I mean, depending on your line of work, but I think in most cases, a lot of us can agree that most of what we do at work is very inconsequential, and the stakes are never as high as any of these corporate people or whatever will make it seem. I mean, yeah, you can screw up and it'll probably mess things up for a bit, but I mean, ultimately, it's never that dire of a situation. And I think my thing was, I always used to really buy into that, like, oh, everything's a life or death thing, and it's really not. It's really not that big a deal. That was kind of like the ultimate realization I had, especially after my last job that I had, where I was there for like 6 years or something. I started because it was in a warehouse, and I started as a forklift driver or order picker, whatever you want to call it. I basically drove around on a forklift and I picked orders for customers all day. And so I did that for like 2 or 3 years, something like that. And then eventually one of the people in the office decided to throw me a bone and was just like, hey, this guy seems competent enough to handle work inside an office. Why don't we bring him in? That's how they brought me in. And like, I kind of like, I don't know. I never really like went fully into the office. I was always like some kind of hybrid of being outside the office and inside, especially after COVID, because I was one of the first people they brought back from being furloughed, and they definitely got their money's worth out of me. I can tell you that much. And especially during that time, I think I realized how important a work-life balance is, because I was like taking stuff home with me, and like I had been doing that like when I was like a forklift driver, like an order picker, and like that type of stuff, just it didn't make any sense to hold on to it, because it was, I mean, a lot of it was dumb and it didn't matter. But I think I was just young and naive, and just, I don't know, you think you're going to get rewarded in like a meaningful way if you do a better job than everyone else, in certain aspects, and in a lot of cases the praise you receive is just, it's just like a, hey, good job, or like, it's all like superficial stuff, and they don't want to actually like reward you in a meaningful way that actually shows appreciation. So, but yeah, nowadays I just kind of recognize that, yeah, a lot of these companies, most of these companies that people work for, don't respect their employees enough to reward them properly when they are doing very good at their job. And so what that looked like for a while, maintaining that work-life balance was, I think a lot of it was, Power Ranger stuff, you know, doing this YouTube channel. I did this YouTube channel as a hobby for years, regularly, more regularly releasing videos and like filming stuff, just about whatever I wanted to talk about at the time. And that was a good way to distract myself from like all of the stuff that was bothering me at work, and just kind of, refocusing my energy onto something a little bit more productive. And so it was like this YouTube channel, collecting, for those unfamiliar, on top of just knowing everything about Power Rangers for no freaking reason, I have a gigantic collection that is like just off camera, but you can see a couple things right here. I have a lot of shit, and I've been collecting all that stuff for, I mean, mostly my whole life, but I've had to kind of restart a couple times since, just because of like, storage units being lost to time and different things happening. But I mostly like started collecting back in 2010, and that was kind of like the same time I started working. So it was mostly when I started having my own disposable income. Collecting was just kind of a fun little hobby thing for me to do. My first job, my hours were really wonky, so, and they weren't usually the same days. So, collecting was just easy. I could just pop by a store, or like go to Frankensons because I'm in Southern California, and just go to all these different places and kind of hunt for stuff. Like the thrill of the hunt. So that's kind of the appeal to collecting for me. And I've enjoyed that for a really long time, and I think I'm kind of like hitting a wall with it now, and that's probably just because Power Rangers is going on its little hiatus or whatever. But I think just like generally, I'm just kind of like over it, because when I look at collecting things for other like tokusatsu type properties like Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, or whatever, I just look at all of it and I'm just like, man, this does not look like as fun as it used to. Because there used to be a sense of satisfaction with collecting for me, and being able to like complete certain lines or figure lines or something like that, or just like a Morpher collection, a role play item set, a Megazord, like going back and like finding old pieces of Megazords and like kind of Frankensteining an old Megazord out of pieces you found throughout the years. There's a big sense of satisfaction with that. And I'd say there's still aspects of that I still enjoy, but I think in the like grand scope of everything, it's really just kind of like whatever. I kind of just get stuff to, just for the sake of completing stuff, but it just doesn't feel as satisfying anymore. So I think with that, it's kind of a sign that, especially with this hiatus coming up for Power Rangers, that it might be time for me to find new hobbies, which is kind of terrifying when you've done a lot of the same thing for the last decade or so. But I think it's important in order to have any kind of growth as a person. And I think for a long time I had like this kind of, I don't know about smug, but I don't know, it was just like a sense of pride, you know, cuz I feel, cuz like I'm one of the those fans that never really fell out of Power Rangers. I've kind of just always had it be a part of my life. It's like just always been a thing that I've been into. There were definitely years where I wasn't paying attention to it as strongly. Those were mostly in my teen years when things got a little weird with that because people kind of got judgy and I got a little insecure about that because everyone in high school is. But you know, I've largely kept a pulse on it, and I do know a lot of people in the fandom have had moments where they have like kind of left the fandom, quote unquote. And you know, I think now is like kind of a good time to do it. And that doesn't mean like I'm going to like leave the community completely outright, because you know I still have friends in it, so it's not like I'm just gonna like disappear one day or just, you know, stop talking about this stuff completely. But I think it's healthy to have a bit of a directional shift, especially during a time when not much is going to be going on. You know, I think for me personally, like the year break is going to be good. Like just for me personally, I think it's going to be good. For the brand, it could be fine. You know, I don't think it will matter in the long run. I think it will just be kind of like a thing that happens. It could be beneficial. I hope it's beneficial. You know, just kind of give people a minute to breathe and then just kind of like tease something coming back and be like, oh, I haven't heard about Power Rangers in a couple years. You know, something like that. Something to just kind of garner hype or whatever. But I think just on a personal level, that the break or whatever is going to be good for me. So that way I can kind of reassess some hobbies, or not rediscover, but just try and venture out and discover new hobbies. Whether that be like, I don't even know. Yeah, I've thought about like maybe learning to play like a keyboard piano. Both my parents are very musical. My mom's side of the family is like very musical. Um, they, my mom's family was in, well, they had a band. So my mom's from Portugal, or the Azores more specifically. Those are, I don't know the specifics, but I know that it's like 9 islands off the coast of Portugal. So it's Portuguese territory. Um, and so when they came to America, um, you know, my uncle got really into playing guitar, music, all that stuff. And so in his 20s, I think he started a band. And a lot of my relatives were members of that. My aunt played the bass. I think she even did drums too. My mom sang in it. She did a little tambourine thing. It was cool. It was like Portuguese folk music, I guess is the best way to describe it. They would play um, at the local, because there's a fairly large Portuguese community within a good uh, distance of where I live. And so, you know, they played for, you know, the local festivals and stuff for years. And when my mom started dating my dad, you know, my dad was always very musical. He was just like a hippie in high school with a guitar, and you know, just into rock and all that. And so when he started dating my mom, you know, her family let him join in on the band, and they, you know, kind of started doing a thing. My dad didn't really understand a lot of the lyrics or anything like that, but you know, he had fun. They would let him sing. Who sings it? Let me. Sorry, let me Google it really quick. They would let him sing "Go Johnny Go" by Chuck Berry. They would cover that pretty frequently, and they would let my dad sing it because his name is John. So it was like that one and like another one. So they did that in like the 80s. And so, yeah. So anyway, all that tangent to say, my family is very musical, and I attempted learning to play the bass in high school, but I didn't really stick with it because my teacher was having me learn like AC/DC, I think, and it was just like music that I was just not interested in learning, and you know, I felt a lot of pressure with it too because I was like trying to learn it because, you know, this is during my church days. We were short a bass player in the band, you know, for like, you know, for in the Christian church, you know, they have like, you know, bands for all their worship music and all that stuff. And so I was like, oh, okay, that'd be kind of cool. And my dad didn't want to teach me because he's not very patient with teaching. So he opted to put me in bass lessons. And I ultimately didn't really stick with it just because it wasn't, I don't know, it just wasn't really something I vibed with. Like, I was able to get it a little bit, but it was just, I don't know, it wasn't for me. But I did always want to like try and pick up something in terms of music. So I felt like keyboard was like good because it's like a good, well-rounded instrument, or like the piano is. And someone made a comment back in the day. This is like when I was a teenager. That said my hands are very good for reaching across the keys. So I'm gonna see if that holds true and if that's helpful. So that's kind of something that's like I'm like brainstorming now. Is like something I might do. Um, you know, and like these things are important to have. You know, like these hobbies outside of work, because you know it stops you from being overwhelmed about stuff going on at work. Because I feel like if there's like not a lot going on in your personal life, you end up like hyper focusing on what's going on at work, and that's not good because like what's going on at work doesn't really matter after you clock out, so there's no reason to bring it home with you. And if you just come home and do nothing, then you kind of spend more time thinking about stuff at work, and then you start thinking about work at home, and that sucks. I don't want to think about work when I'm at home. As soon as I leave, whatever happens, happens. Whatever thing I forgot to send, I'll deal with the problem tomorrow or on Monday if it's a Friday night like today, you know. And I'm really proud of myself for that progress because I feel like I used to hold on to it for way too long, like to the point where like it's like, dude, why are you even still on this? Like it doesn't even matter. So but I'm trying to think of like the point where all that changed. I think it was like mostly COVID, where it was like I finally just kind of made my peace with how that was, and I just really needed to realize that like I need to take care of myself because my job ain't. My job's gonna use me until they can't anymore, you know. That's just kind of how that works, and I needed to prioritize like, you know, taking care of myself and not being afraid to take time off. I used to feel really bad about calling out sick or something like that, but now I just doesn't matter to me. Um, yeah, I used to have like a sense of guilt about like calling in, even if I was like really sick, and that's just like not healthy. You know, I really have gotten better with, sometimes we're just having an off day. Like, it's not just, you know, a lot of people call out sick for more than just like, actually being sick. There's just days it's just not happening. It's just, there's just days where you just are not up to it. You just don't want to deal with it because it's just a lot. And that's perfectly fine and that's perfectly valid. And I think it should be less frowned upon than it is. And I think younger people, mostly speaking of like millennials, younger, don't look at it as don't look on look don't look down on it as much as it, like Gen X and baby boomers do. And that's kind of just like a product of, the culture they grew up in. But yeah, I think millennials and Gen Z like really have a better grasp on trying to do just enough for work. And I think there's a happy medium to be had, with like striving to do good and like make things better, but also recognizing that like you can't always just be given all that, because what a lot of these places will do is the minute you show that you can do all of these things, they just start expecting that of you all the time without like proper compensation for it. And it's just like, no, why are you making me do all this stuff that was not expected of me when I started, but now you're expecting it of me because I've been here a while and I pay attention and I've learned stuff. It's very counterintuitive, at least in my eyes. And it's just like is, kind of scummy behavior anyway. So I don't know about you guys, but when it comes to like work, I don't know, like I think because I didn't really have like a big gap in like, from going to high school to work, I didn't really have a gap in social situations, if that makes any sense. So like when you're in school, right, as a kid, right, most of your social interactions come from going to school. That's how you network, that's kind of how you meet new people, and that's kind of how that all happens for most people in high school, or just in school in general. For me, like, I had that, but most of my friendships came from church. So there are like other places, but that's what most of your networking comes from. And so, right after high school, I kind of just made the jump from that to work. And so I think kind of the expectation, when at least I had this expectation of myself, or I guess of other people, was when I entered the workforce, I just assumed those same kind of rules, kind of applied to work. So, like, you make friends at school as a kid, and then as an adult, you make friends at work, and that's just kind of how that works. And I think there's more to it than that. I think it is possible to make friends at work. I have plenty of people that I've worked with that, I'm still friends with today. And, we, we got to know each other outside of the place we met. And I think the expectation I used to have was, or not an expectation, but an assumption I used to make was that if someone didn't want to be my friend at work is because they had like a problem with me. And I don't think that's the case anymore, thankfully, because everyone is at that job for a different reason. And it could just be that someone has dedicated a lot more of their time to their personal life, and in their personal life, their big thing might be going out on the weekends or whatever, or going out to bars or whatever, just like going other places and being social. And so that's kind of their way of networking. So when it comes to like work and stuff, they kind of just want to go to work and have that be their job and be done and go home. And that's perfectly valid. And I used to kind of take stuff like that personally, but I don't really anymore, because like I get it. It's like you're not really, I don't know, you're not really going to see too many people you work with outside of work, if at all. So it's not really a big deal if you're not like friends with them. That's not to say you still can't be friendly and cordial and all that stuff with them. But I definitely have noticed, especially at this job that I've gotten the past couple years, there are definitely people with way firmer boundaries on the personal relationships they want to, maintain at work. And some of them are just like, made very apparent, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine, and that's perfectly valid, and I think that's important. And it is helpful, because it stops you from like nurturing relationships that don't actually mean anything, because you can put all your time and energy into like trying to cultivate relationships with people that just are not beneficial to you. And I think it's good to have people who know what they want from their job. And sometimes it's just like, I just come here for a paycheck and that's it. And I'm not really interested in making friends. And it's like, okay, cool, I guess. And some people it's just like, I'm perfectly fine with talking to you outside of work or whatever. And, it's knowing which ones to pursue and which ones to just kind of let be. And that's also made me realize that meeting people like that has made me realize that I don't really put myself in as many social situations as I probably could outside of work. There's like a con I will go to, a con or two that I will go to occasionally. But even still, very rarely am I just talking to strangers. Like sometimes it happens, sometimes it's happened, and I've made a friend or whatever. But it's not always the case. And then sometimes I've like met people at places and ends up being a pyramid scheme. That's always fun. Those are always fun. Those MLM people work really, really hard. But yeah, that's the part I struggle with, is like trying to find like places to actually cultivate new relationships with people. And I think the part that I struggle with is that it kind of requires, well, it requires you putting yourself out there, which is terrifying, because it could not turn out good. But also it's just like, it's awkward. It also requires kind of like a routine, I feel, because I feel like if you go to certain places frequently enough, you will eventually network, and because you'll be more familiar with the area or whatever, you'll just feel more comfortable in the environment, and I feel like you would open up more to people. So, when it comes to stuff like that, I could really stand to be better about that, and that's definitely something I want to work on because, yeah, because I don't know, man. I just get really. It's not that I can't talk to people. Like, I do this, and a lot of you listening to this, have talked to me normally. I don't have a problem talking to people, but it's really just making that first move and, like, actually making contact with someone is what I really struggle with. Because, it's just, you don't want to be the first one to do it. Like, and you don't want to be rejected. It's probably like a fear of rejection type of thing. I don't know. But, whatever the reason is, it's not good. It's not great. So it's definitely something to work on, and hopefully it's something I can get better at. And I think I just personally have to just kind of make a plan. It's just something you have to do, like, where you feel like, if you feel like you aren't being social enough, I think the biggest step you can take is just kind of like leaving the house and just, I don't know, whenever I don't know what to do or where to go on the weekends or something like that, if I don't have like plans or something, I just like drive around and just kind of go wherever. There was a time, and I still kind of do this just kind of out of habit, like with collecting and all that, where, you just kind of like drive to stores or whatever, and you just kind of like browse around and just see if there's anything new, even though most cases there isn't, or there's just like a bunch of stuff you don't care about. So, and that is just kind of like, with my attitude towards collecting recently, it's just kind of like really hollow, and it's just kind of like a thing I do. It's just kind of like muscle memory, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, I think it's like thinking out. I gotta think more outside of the box of like things to do and like places to go. And yeah, I think that's kind of like the first step I need to take, towards like doing all of these things. Because I am noticing like a bit of a shift. Like, even though my work-life balance is a little bit better nowadays, I am still noticing like an imbalance beginning to happen, where I'm like thinking about stuff happening at work at home again, and it's just because I don't really have anything else going on. um and it's just probably because I'm not putting myself out there enough, and I'm not like, making time to go do new things or try new things or whatever. And I think that's the key, is like just trying to find, just being willing to try stuff and be willing to fail at stuff. Like, with like these new hobbies I'm like trying to find, like with playing the piano or whatever. I might get the keyboard and start practicing it, and then ultimately realize I don't really like it as much as I thought I would, and that's fine. And then you just like kind of figure out something else, but you have to at least be willing to like try stuff out for a little bit, so that way at the very least it gives you something um, interesting to talk about. Because I don't know, when you have such a niche and specific hobby like I've had for the last 30 years of my life, uh, uh, I don't know, it can just be, you can kind of reach a point where it's just like, I kind of feel like I've exhausted everything I needed to talk about, or I am at a point where I am exhausted about talking about all of these things, because I don't know. It's just it can get monotonous and just kind of boring after a while. So it's I think it's good to like find stuff. I'm really envious. There's people I know that are able to pick up so many different things, and and that's great. I think certain people just have, I don't know, the wherewithal, the drive, the audacity, whatever you want to call it, to just be able to try stuff out and not worry about whether or not they're going to be good at it or not. And some of them, I think it's just like, it doesn't matter if, like, they don't really care about being bad at something because they're always just committed to being really good at stuff. And so they're able to recognize really easily that even though they suck at something now, it doesn't mean they will, 1, 2, 3 months from now. You know what I mean? So, yeah, man. So yeah, I think that'll be it for tonight. So I hope you guys enjoyed this little talk we had, and I hope that you're able to. I hope you're able to find balance with your personal, work and life balance. I hope you're able to find that, and I hope you all recognize it sooner than I did that you're gonna need different things at different times. So your work-life balance, you have to be kind of flexible with it in order to I don't know, get the most of it. So just stuff to keep in mind. It's gonna change. It's not gonna be the same thing. I thought it was gonna be just collecting for ever, for like the next 20, 30 years of my life. But hey, it turns out there's more to life than just collecting toys. Who'd have thought? I was personally shocked when I found that out. But anyways, guys, thank you all for tuning in tonight. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcast or any of the other podcast hosts this is on, thank you so much for listening on those platforms. And if you would be so kind as to rate the podcast, I would greatly appreciate that. That'd be fantastic. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you could like the video, that'd be cool. Leave a comment. Let me know ways you navigate your work-life balance and how you can see yourself trying to improve that in the future. So just let me know. Let's have a conversation in the comments. I don't really try to actively engage with you guys, with the podcast directly, but you guys know where I am on social media. I'm at Willie J. Co. on everything, just about. So if you ever want to like talk about some podcast stuff in detail, a little further in detail, hit me up. I am not completely a stranger. We still share a parasocial relationship because you're listening to me talk on the internet. But I'm always willing to have a conversation with someone, and we can just talk about stuff. Yeah, sound good? Awesome, fantastic. Thanks for tuning in tonight, you guys, and I will see you next week for another Friday Night Chill.